180 million euros. A World Cup before the age of 20. A hat-trick in the greatest final of his generation, and still no trophy in his hands. Kylian Mbappé did not rise slowly. He exploded into football, tearing through defenders with a speed that made entire stadiums hold their breath. At 19, France placed him beside Pelé. By 23, the world expected him to carry a nation, rescue Paris, conquer Europe, and inherit the throne left by Messi and Ronaldo. Then the applause changed. Paris began to question him. Madrid waited to judge him. Every missed chance became a verdict. Every defeat, a stain on a career still being written. Behind the goals, the contracts, and the white-hot lights stood a young man discovering that greatness offers no protection from failure. The faster he ran, the heavier the expectations became. Leave a like for the player who learned that even 3 goals on the biggest night of his life could not stop the trophy from moving away. Before the first television crew arrived, the morning light fell across a modest football ground in Bondy, and a small boy waited near the touchline while his father worked. Kylian Mbappé was born in Paris in December 1998 and raised in this northeastern suburb, a place shaped by many cultures, crowded apartment blocks, and a deep football life. His childhood was stable rather than desperate. The family understood sport from the inside. Wilfried Mbappé coached at AS Bondy and watched his son's first movements with the same trained eye he used on every other child. Faiza Lamari had competed in handball at a high level and knew the private cost hidden behind public performance. Early mornings, tired legs, repeated drills, and the obligation to return after a poor day. Their home stood close enough to the field for football to enter ordinary family life. Boots scraped across the floor. Match plans reached the dinner table. Training continued in conversation after the lights over the ground had gone dark. Kylian learned that speed could open a space, but discipline decided what happened inside it. Wilfried refused to let fatherhood become a shortcut. At training, Kylian had to recover his position, release the ball, listen to correction, and earn the trust of teammates who were also carrying dreams. Years later, Wilfried remembered how carefully they had kept the relationship separate on the field. One day, Kylian called me Papa. The small word revealed how completely the coach had tried to disappear inside the work. Faiza protected a different boundary. As attention began to gather, she helped keep outside interests from deciding the pace of her son's life. Her description of the family's role was simple. We accompany him, we do not decide for him. Bondy held many gifted children, many muddy pairs of socks, many parents waiting beside fences at the end of practice. Only a few players would be seen at the right moment. Kylian trained beside boys who wanted the same future and would never receive the same invitation. He began to understand, without needing it explained, that effort and opportunity did not always arrive together. His bedroom walls carried photographs of Cristiano Ronaldo in the white shirt of Real Madrid. The pictures were not decoration alone. They gave a boy from Bondy a visible measure of the highest level. The posture before a free kick, the controlled face after a goal, the expectation of deciding a match when 80,000 people were waiting. Outside that room, the education remained less glamorous. Kylian followed Wilfried to sessions, watched older players, and learned how quickly a promising child could disappear from the pathway through timing, injury, competition, or circumstance. He wanted to play with boys above his age because the speed of their decisions forced him to think sooner. Adults first noticed the acceleration, and they stayed interested because he appeared to see the next movement before it existed. Long before the world called him a phenomenon, Bondy knew him as the boy who never wanted the game to end. Soon, the family would have to decide how quickly that boy should be allowed to become a professional. The white shirt on Kylian's wall became real when Real Madrid invited him to visit as a young teenager. The corridors, training fields, and faces he had known through a screen now stood within reach. Zinedine Zidane welcomed him into the club's world. Cristiano Ronaldo, the player whose photographs had watched over his childhood, was suddenly close enough for a picture. Kylian was 13, old enough to understand the meaning of the invitation, and young enough for the moment to feel larger than language. Real Madrid represented the destination he had imagined, yet Wilfried and Faiza chose patience. Their son needed minutes, instruction, and room to make mistakes before entering a system capable of turning a child into a global promise. The family did not close the door. They asked the dream to wait. Clairefontaine replaced the freedom of the neighborhood field with a national standard. Mbappé trained beside some of the strongest young players in France, each one accustomed to being the best where he came from. Natural speed no longer settled every exercise. Positioning mattered. Timing mattered. The run made for a teammate mattered. Video sessions exposed the delayed step and the careless loss of shape. Morning work began before the body felt fully awake, and boots were left drying beside bags that had to be packed again for the next session. Competition gave talent a harder edge. Mbappé still wanted the ball in decisive areas, but he learned that a team could not rearrange itself around every impulse of one gifted player. The discipline first demanded by Wilfred became the language of an elite environment. Monaco offered the next careful step. Mbappé entered the first team while still young enough to look slight beside experienced professionals, then began passing age records once associated with Thierry Henry. The comparison drew attention, but his football developed its own shape. He could cross open grass with startling speed, slow himself near the penalty area, and finish with a calmness that seemed detached from the noise. During the 2016-2017 season, Monaco played with fearless movement and reached deep into the Champions League. Against established European opponents, Mbappé stopped looking like a boy invited into the occasion. Defenders began retreating before he received the ball. Stadiums rose when space appeared in front of him. Monaco won the French league, and the quiet decisions made in Bondy now looked less like caution than preparation. At the 2018 World Cup, Didier Deschamps placed the 19-year-old inside a French team built on control, physical discipline, and sudden acceleration. The match against Argentina became the moment millions met him. Mbappé attacked open ground with the directness of the boy who had once demanded to play against older children. His running bent the defense backward and turned one of football's most famous teams into a group trying to survive the next few seconds. France advanced, and the scale of the stage increased without changing his expression. In the final against Croatia, rain moved through the stadium lights as Mbappé scored and became the first teenager since Pelé to find the net in a World Cup final. When the whistle ended the match, the medal rested against his chest, and the trophy rose above a team that had trusted its youngest attacker. At 19, he had reached the summit many legends pursued for an entire lifetime. The celebration gave France a new hero. It also created a standard that would follow him into every ordinary evening that came afterward. Paris Saint-Germain brought Mbappé back toward home in 2017 and placed him inside a project determined to become one of Europe's defining clubs. The distance from Bondy was small on a map, but the environment around him had changed completely. Training sessions drew international cameras. A single touch could travel across the world before the team left the ground. The transfer made him one of football's most expensive players while he was still learning the deeper habits of the position. Paris needed immediate production and a future identity at the same time. Mbappé carried both demands from his first season. Edinson Cavani had already earned the affection of supporters through relentless work and goals. And Neymar arrived with the authority of a global star expected to lead the European ambition. Mbappé learned beside them, adjusting the parts of his game that speed could not solve. He stayed wide when the center was crowded, released the ball earlier, and waded through stretches when another forward occupied the decisive space. Later, Lionel Messi entered the same dressing room with the weight of an era behind him. Mbappé had spent years being described as football's future. Now he shared the field with a man who had defined its recent past. The arrangement demanded awareness. A celebrated attack still depended on small, almost anonymous acts. One runner clearing a lane, one pass arriving at the correct pace, one player accepting that the best decision might remove him from the final photograph. His game became more complete because French opponents often denied him the open field that first made him famous. And defenses sat deep, compressed the penalty area, and forced him to work through smaller spaces. Training shifted toward measured finishing, movement before the pass, and the patience to remain involved when a match offered few clean chances. Mbappé grew from a young runner into the forward teammates searched for when the game tightened. His face appeared on stadium walls and across global campaigns, but the more important change occurred in responsibility. He became Paris Saint-Germain's leading scorer and gradually carried the captaincy of France. Yet the numbers mattered because of what they changed around him. Opponents built plans around his first step. Younger teammates watched his reaction after a missed chance. The armband weighed almost nothing in the hand, and far more once the whistle sounded. Paris had given him a stage near the place where his life began. It also moved him into a position where a routine victory rarely created peace. Supporters expected the goal because they had seen it so often. Television expected a decision because his name occupied the screen. The club expected leadership because the project increasingly pointed toward him. Success became less like a gift and more like the minimum entry fee for another week of judgment. The boy who once stayed after training because he did not want the game to end now played inside a calendar where the game never seemed to end at all. After a poor performance, the locker room carried none of the rain, music, or raised arms of Moscow. Shirts hung open inside the stalls, tape loosened from ankles. A bottle remained near a bench, while the first reactions were already moving across television and phones outside. Mbappé could remove his boots and leave the stadium, but the match continued without him. One missed chance appeared from several angles. A decision made in less than a second filled an evening of discussion. At 19, the World Cup had placed him beside Pelé. In his early 20s, Cristiano Ronaldo, Lionel Messi, and Thierry Henry became the measuring line for almost every week of his career. The comparisons arrived after goals and after silence, as though an unfinished athlete were already required to defend a completed legacy. The public knew the transfer value, the scoring total, the sponsorships, and the shape of his celebration. It knew far less about the hours between the team bus and the next morning's work. A hotel room could remain quiet while the television replayed the same movement. The stadium lights went dark, yet the judgment continued. Ordinary mistakes of youth were enlarged because Mbappé had reached extraordinary success before most players had learned how to live with attention. Victories confirmed what people already believed. Defeats became evidence for what they believed he lacked. Even leadership arrived early. He had to answer questions about the Ballon d'Or, national responsibility, contracts, and historical standing, while still discovering what kind of teammate and captain he wanted to become. The family no longer needed to be explained through job titles. Their importance was visible in continuity. In the same people who had known him before, the numbers remained nearby when the numbers became the loudest part of his public identity. Private life stayed largely behind a closed door. That silence protected a space, though it also encouraged outsiders to fill the empty areas with their own conclusions. Mbappé returned instead to the routine he could control. Cones set on grass, repeated finishing, recovery work, meals prepared for performance, and laces tightened before another session. Training did not erase criticism. It reduced the world to a ball, a body, and the next correct decision. The deepest strain was not that fame had removed every ordinary part of youth. It was that patience had narrowed around him. A young player is usually allowed to remain incomplete. Mbappé was asked to behave like a finished legend before the middle of his career. The world watched him grow older, but rarely lowered its voice long enough to let him grow slowly. In Paris, that pressure entered a dressing room, where several other men had also been built to occupy the center. Status would soon become visible from 12 yards away. The penalty spot sat 12 yards from goal, a small white mark capable of exposing the full distance between talent and balance. Neymar had arrived in Paris as the centerpiece of the club's European ambition. Cavani already held a place earned through years of running and goals. Mbappé was younger, French, and tied to the future the club increasingly wanted to build. When responsibility for penalties became a public issue, the disagreement reached beyond one kick. It touched the order of a room filled with players accustomed to deciding matches. Mbappé and Neymar could combine with ease, celebrate beneath the same lights, and still differ over who should take control when a game narrowed to one moment. Their relationship contained productive football, public warmth, and periods of professional tension. Messi's arrival made the arrangement even more delicate. Great reputations still had to fit inside the same 90 minutes and the same limited space near goal. The Champions League magnified every imbalance. Paris Saint-Germain had been built to win it, and domestic success gradually felt like a requirement rather than a destination. The closest approach came in 2020, when Paris faced Bayern Munich in a final played before mostly empty stands. Kingsley Coman's goal separated the teams. At the whistle, Bayern's players ran together, while the Paris shirts remained spread across the field. The absence of a normal crowd made the scene feel strangely private, even as millions watched from home. A medal waited for players who had arrived expecting the cup. Mbappé was 21. The defeat became part of the project's public record, another European night Paris had been unable to complete. In 2022, the setting made the loss more intimate. Paris carried an advantage into the second leg against Real Madrid, and Mbappé scored in the stadium he had dreamed about since childhood. For a time, the path looked open. Then Karim Benzema scored 3 times, the sound inside the Bernabeu changed, and control disappeared from Paris in a matter of minutes. Mbappé walked away from the field he had once visited as a 13-year-old after completing much of what his role required, while the structure around him came apart. The replay belonged to Madrid's mythology. The remaining hours belonged to the visitors who had to leave through a quieter corridor. Bayern ended the campaign again in 2023. Borussia Dortmund stopped Paris in the 2024 semifinals, when shots struck the frame and fell away. At the Parc des Princes, the crowd kept rising for an equalizer that never came. The final whistle left the goal frame standing exactly where it had denied them, white paint under bright light, indifferent to how close the ball had passed. In the margins could be seen in inches. The consequences lasted through another summer. Football belonged to the entire team, but the largest face on the stadium wall received the largest share of the verdict. Influence gave Mbappé privileges and placed him near the center of major decisions. It also meant that every European ending reached him first. When Paris won, victory appeared proportionate to the investment. When Paris fell, the central figure was asked to explain the whole structure. The Champions League became more than a competition. It became the instrument used to measure his years in the city. Paris gave him a crown, yet the trophy intended to justify it remained out of reach. Those disappointments accumulated one spring at a time. The next wound would arrive in a single night. The French players stood beneath the white lights of Lusail, close enough to hear one another breathe. Across the field, Argentina waited with Lionel Messi at the center of his final pursuit of the World Cup. Mbappé faced a different possibility, a second title before his 24th birthday. The two Paris teammates had shared passes during the season. Now the final was reduced in public imagination to two faces, one trying to complete a lifetime, the other appearing ready to begin a reign. Argentina controlled the opening stretch. Its midfield closed the spaces. The first French pass arrived under pressure, and attacks ended before Mbappé could reach open grass. The scoreboard moved to 2-0. Didier Deschamps changed players before halftime. On the bench, time seemed to leave faster than France could follow it. With roughly 10 minutes of regulation left, France received a penalty. Mbappé placed the ball on the spot. Emiliano Martinez reached toward the shot, but could not keep it out. Less than 2 minutes later, Marcus Thuram returned the ball into Mbappé's path, and the strike came before it touched the ground. The net lifted. A match that had looked finished was suddenly level. In extra time, Messi put Argentina ahead again. Players bent forward during stoppages, hands on knees, shirts dark with effort. Another French penalty sent Mbappé back to the same mark against the same goalkeeper. He scored again. 3 goals in a World Cup final, each delivered with no room for correction, had carried France back from the edge 3 separate times. The final seconds produced one last opening. Randal Kolo Muani broke through, and Martinez blocked the shot with an outstretched leg. Penalties followed. Mbappé walked from the center circle and scored once more. Then he returned to the line of teammates and watched. Coman's attempt was saved. Tchouaméni sent his shot wide. Gonzalo Montiel converted Argentina's final kick, and the blue and white bench emptied onto the field. Messi disappeared beneath teammates. And French players remained near the center circle, some standing, some folded at the waist, facing a celebration they could not enter. Mbappé had scored from open play, converted every penalty placed before him, and completed almost every responsibility a forward could carry. The scoreboard still belonged to Argentina. During the ceremony, the Golden Boot was placed in his hands after 8 goals in the tournament. The World Cup stood nearby, waiting for another captain. Cameras required Mbappé to step forward for individual recognition and then move back into defeat. Emmanuel Macron approached on the field while confetti covered the grass. The gold-colored award caught the same light as the cup, but it belonged to a different kind of achievement, one that could be carried alone. Mbappé looked toward the celebration rather than toward the object in his hands. Later, the ordinary evidence of a long match remained around the French team: loosened boots, damp shirts, discarded tape, recovery drinks. Outside, the world replayed the 3 goals as proof of greatness. Inside, the final Argentine kick had already ended the argument. There was no tactical board left to correct, no extra session that could reopen the match, only the return flight and a medal that would always sit beside the memory of the trophy moving away. Mbappé's first public message afterward contained only a few words: "We will return." It did not change the night. It gave the morning a direction. History would preserve the hat-trick. The trophy had already left with someone else. A shirt marked 2025 was raised above the Parc des Princes pitch in May 2022, while supporters celebrated a decision that seemed to settle the future. Mbappé had been widely expected to join Real Madrid when his contract expired. Instead, he extended his stay with Paris Saint-Germain. Nasser Al-Khelaifi stood beside him as the club presented the agreement as a victory for the project. Madrid supporters felt the disappointment of a promise that had appeared close. Mbappé remained near home and accepted another attempt to finish the European work left incomplete. The dream in Spain was delayed again, though this time the delay carried a larger public cost. The conflict returned in 2023 when Mbappé informed Paris that he would not activate the option extending the contract beyond the following summer. The club faced losing its most valuable player without a transfer payment and wanted either a new agreement or a sale. Mbappé intended to complete the contract and keep control of the choice that followed. The disagreement left the offices and entered the training calendar. His name was removed from the group traveling to Japan. While teammates left for the preseason tour, he remained in France and worked away from the main squad for a period. The same training ground still held goals, cones, and the sound of clean contact with the ball. The change lay in the empty spaces around him. He later returned to the first team, but the relationship no longer carried its earlier simplicity. In May 2024, Mbappé confirmed that 7 seasons in Paris were ending. His final home appearance held affection, applause, and visible restraint, rather than the full farewell normally built around a figure of his importance. A supporters' display rose from the stand. The league trophy ceremony followed. Mbappé thanked teammates, coaches, employees, supporters, and the city. His final match for Paris ended with a French Cup victory, a clean result beside an untidy goodbye. After he left, a financial dispute over salary and bonuses continued through formal channels. A Paris labor court later ordered the club to pay unpaid compensation while rejecting several additional claims. That legal outcome matters to the record, but the emotional fact was simpler. A relationship that began as a homecoming ended in documents, competing interpretations, and distance. The Parc des Princes moved on to new names and new voices. Mbappé moved toward the club whose crest had once covered his bedroom wall. Gratitude and disappointment remained beside each other, difficult to separate after 7 years of shared ambition. He had not stopped caring about Paris. He had reached the point where the postponed dream could no longer be asked to wait. The white shirt was ready. It offered fulfillment, never shelter. More than 80,000 people filled the Santiago Bernabéu before Mbappé had played a minute for Real Madrid. White shirts climbed from the field to the upper stands, and 15 European cups stood behind the stage like a row of witnesses. And Zidane was present, connecting the day to the visit made when Kylian was 13. Florentino Perez welcomed the player the club had pursued for years. Mbappé spoke in Spanish and looked toward his family. "I have slept for many years with the dream of playing for Real Madrid," he told the crowd. Then his voice reached the detail no ceremony could manufacture. "My family is happy, and my mum is crying." Faiza had once helped a child slow the dream down. Now she watched him arrive as a man. The presentation closed a circle, but the dressing room opened a new problem. Mbappé later admitted that he had slept for only about an hour and a half before the ceremony, nerves keeping him awake on the morning he had imagined for years. The body of an elite athlete, trained to control breath and movement before a final, had been unsettled by a childhood promise coming true. At Paris, the project had gradually moved toward Mbappé. Madrid already had its own order. Vinicius Jr. occupied the left side where Mbappé had often felt most free. Jude Bellingham carried influence through midfield. Rodrigo understood patterns built through seasons of shared work. The new arrival brought the largest individual name, yet he entered a team that had learned how to win before him. Adaptation lived in details too small for the presentation screen. Which runner stayed wide, who attacked the center when the first press began, and who surrendered a preferred lane because another movement offered the team more. And training replaced ceremony. Video sessions asked the same questions of him that they asked of every player. Had the run begun too early? Had he narrowed the space for Vinicius? Could the pressure on the defender have started sooner? Mbappé had spent years attacking from the left with grass ahead of him. In Madrid often required him to work centrally, receive with a defender close to his back, and wait inside crowded areas. Some nights ended without the decisive action the Bernabeu expected. The shirt that had looked weightless during the presentation carried a different feel in the tunnel. Cristiano Ronaldo's shadow entered every scoring comparison, though Ronaldo's Madrid story was already complete. Mbappé was still learning the first pages of his own. Goals returned through repetition rather than revelation. Runs aligned more naturally with the movement around him. Teammates learned the pace of the pass he wanted, and he learned when their opening mattered more than his own. Individual scoring honors confirmed that the adaptation was working, but Madrid has never treated personal numbers as the final argument. The club measures forwards in collective trophies and decisive spring nights. Mbappé understood the difference. On the day of his arrival, he had called humility, ambition, and winning the club's values. The first two could be practiced daily. The last one remained a judgment delivered at the end of the season. The dream had become real. It had also become work. The number 10 shirt now hangs beneath Mbappé's name in the Real Madrid dressing room. At 27, he remains captain of France and one of the most watched athletes in the world. The 2025 to 2026 season gave him 42 goals in 44 appearances for Madrid. In 25 came in La Liga, earning him a second consecutive Pichichi trophy. 15 more made him the leading scorer in the Champions League. The numbers described a forward operating at extraordinary speed and precision. They did not deliver the European Cup he had spent so many years pursuing. That absence became more difficult to ignore because the trophy had finally reached Paris without him. One season after Mbappé left, Paris Saint-Germain defeated Inter Milan 5-0 to claim the first Champions League title in club history. A year later, Paris defeated Arsenal on penalties and retained it. The competition that had defined Mbappé's 7 seasons in the French capital had remained beyond his reach, then stayed in Paris for 2 consecutive years after his departure. The sequence invited easy judgments, although football rarely obeys such simple explanations. Paris had changed its structure, Madrid carried its own demands, and no single player could account for everything that followed. Still, the image possessed a quiet cruelty. Mbappé had scored more Champions League goals than anyone during the season, while the trophy was lifted again by the club he had left behind. Individual excellence had placed his name at the top of another list. The cup still belonged to someone else. The same contradiction followed him into the 2026 World Cup. Mbappé scored 10 times, won the Golden Boot for the second consecutive tournament, and raised his career total to 22 goals in 22 World Cup matches, the highest total in the history of the competition. Yet France's campaign ended without a medal. Spain controlled the semi-final and defeated them 2-0. 4 days later, England won a 10-goal third-place match, 6-4, leaving France in 4th place. Mbappé scored twice that evening and moved beyond every previous World Cup goalscorer, accomplishing something no player had managed while the team around him absorbed another defeat. After the semi-final, he spoke with the bluntness of a captain who understood that history could not repair the dressing room. We wanted to go to the final. We did not go. The record belonged to the tournament. The disappointment belonged to the people who had expected to play its final match. Once again, the numbers said that Mbappé had done more than almost anyone could have asked. Once again, they were unable to change where the trophy went. Away from match day, his public life remains quieter than the scale of his fame suggests. Family continues to provide the structure without needing to be introduced again as management or protection. And their presence survives in the old photograph carried forward. in the mother who cried at the Bernabeu, and in the father who once stood on a Bondi touchline refusing to make the game easier for his son. Mbappé's work with children has preserved another connection to those beginnings. Through his foundation and community initiatives, young people have entered stadiums, educational programs, cultural activities, and sporting experiences that might once have appeared distant. Hundreds attended his Madrid presentation. They watched a man complete the dream many of them were still learning to name. Bondi remains smaller than the stadiums that now call him. The fence still separates the field from the street. Children wait for a turn, some wearing his name across their shoulders, seeing the finished image before they can understand the years beneath it. The adult life behind that image is built from repetition. Recovery, treatment, film study, travel, quiet mornings after loud nights, and another session beginning before the body has forgotten the last match. There is privilege in that life and sacrifice inside the privilege. There are medals, unfinished ambitions, and defeats that personal records cannot erase. At the Bernabeu, tens of thousands of voices turn one name into sound. When the stadium empties, the work returns to smaller decisions, one movement adjusted, one pass discussed with a teammate, one chance studied, without allowing it to become the whole performance. The Champions League with Madrid remains an ambition. France will ask more of its captain. Awards will continue to place individuals in order, as though a career could be settled cleanly by a list. Mbappé's deeper legacy is still being formed through less visible choices. How he carries authority, how he responds when the scoreboard refuses him, how he treats the people who run beside him, and whether the distance traveled from Bondi can shorten the road for another child. The next chapter carries a face from the earliest part of that journey. When Mbappé visited Real Madrid at 13, Zinedine Zidane welcomed him into the club, whose white shirt covered his bedroom walls. Zidane stood near the beginning of the dream, a French legend opening a door for a child still years away from professional football. On July 28, 2026, the French Football Federation appointed Zidane as the new head coach of the national team on a 4-year contract. He succeeded Didier Deschamps after France's 4th-place World Cup finish and inherited a captain carrying the tournament's scoring record, 2 golden boots, and the disappointment of another ending that personal brilliance could not rescue. In the man who once welcomed the boy to Madrid would now coach the adult responsible for leading France. Their first meeting belonged to possibility. Their next chapter will be measured by what they can build from unfinished work. Kylian Mbappé reached many childhood dreams before most people discover their path. Each finish line revealed another demand beyond it. The boy who once stared at Zidane, Ronaldo, and the white shirt of Real Madrid now wears that shirt beneath the brightest lights in club football. The legend who once welcomed him into Madrid now waits beside the French touchline. Between them stands a question that speed, records, and individual awards cannot answer alone. Can Mbappé turn all that history into the collective triumph that has continued to move beyond his reach? If his journey has reminded you of the human weight behind extraordinary success, leave a respectful message below and share the moment in his career you will remember most.